could deny people access to healthcare exchanges if the legislature doesn't vote to set one up or the people don't vote to set one up.
No, all it does, the bill does not do that. It does not deny anyone anything. It merely says that before we set up a healthcare exchange, we're not going to have the governor or anyone acting on his behalf, unelected, do it, which he's already tried to do. We stopped it last September. It says before we have a healthcare exchange in Missouri, there will either be a vote of the people authorizing it or a vote of their elected representatives in the House and Senate.
Recognizing that the current legislature would oppose it, it's likely then you're going to default to a federal government exchange.
You know what? The whole superstructure, the whole ridiculous Rube Goldberg monstrosity contraption of Obamacare is collapsing and dissolving before our very eyes. The HHS Department of Health and Human Services, is missing their own deadlines called for in the bill. They've issued 2,000 waivers to politically connected labor unions and favored groups who do not have to comply with what the rest of America has to comply with. This law is dissolving and collapsing of its own weight. And meanwhile, the effect of the Supreme Court ruling 12 days ago is that we have an Obamacare election in this country, an election on the Obama tax and the vast array of new taxes in that bill. That's teed up for the November election. And if the people render the verdict that I believe they're going to, elect a new president and more conservatives to represent them in Washington, D.C., then we're going to repeal it. And that issue is before the people, and I therefore think that the governors of Texas, Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina, and other governors, Governor Christie in New Jersey, who have said no to an exchange, they're right. They're right to say it. Now, there's this threat that you refer to, of if a state doesn't do the exchange, the feds will come in and do an exchange. Guess what? The feds don't have the money to do it either. And the Congress, the Republican majority in the House, is in the process of defunding Obamacare. Now, this is how we decide big questions in this country. We take them to the people with an accurate and fair ballot summary, and we fight them out in the election. It is the people of Missouri and the people of America who get the final say.
Isn't it the legislature's fault that this happened since they didn't write a ballot summary themselves?
Yeah, I defer to anybody in the legislature for why they chose not to write the language, but I do believe that Secretary of State Carnahan should have consulted with the two House and Senate sponsors for suggested ballot language. We know from the record that did not happen.
Do you plan to sue over the court plan changes too, considering
over the what?
The amendment changing the court plan as well?
I have one lawsuit at a time for me. I've now got my second one, but the first one's in the Court of Appeals.
Do you have a problem with that ballot summary language?
I'm not happy with it, but I chose this one because this has been my fight.
Any reason why, considering...
Because this is my fight. For the last 3.5 years, I've been the leading opponent of this monstrosity in Obamacare and having it crammed down our throats in the state of Missouri.
And granted,
So say, who's going to pay for this lawsuit?
We're raising private funds, and that's incumbent on me and the other folks involved in the suit.
You've been on record opposing a special session to opt out of the Medicaid expansion. Why do you feel that should be happening?
We're 90-something days or 100 days out from an election. I guess 110 days out from an election in November that's going to decide a lot of these questions. We don't have time to have a special session for an opt-out. And by the way, no one has saluted that when it's been run up the flagpole. It's run up the flagpole by one guy, and no one, not one person, has said that's been a good idea other than the person who suggested it. The elected leaders of the House and Senate said it would be a waste of money. They said the way to resolve this is in the courts. It can be resolved in a matter of weeks in the courts with good ballot language. And there's nothing for the legislature to do of any essential nature before we reconvene